August 7, 1942, over Iron Bottom Sound, Solomon Islands. Fighter Squadron 6 launched 16 F4F Wildcats at dawn. By 10 a.m., only 11 remained airborne. The Japanese A6M Zero fighters held every tactical advantage: speed, climb rate, maneuverability, yet American pilots continued pressing attacks with aircraft outmatched in nearly every performance category. Intelligence logs from USS Enterprise recorded a loss ratio of 2.3 American fighters for every Zero confirmed destroyed. Captain Joe Mannion, leading the 2nd Division, watched tracer rounds arc past his canopy as his engine coughed at 12,000 feet. The carburetor stumbled in negative G maneuvers, a known defect. His wingman's aircraft trailed smoke, falling away toward the water. Yet in maintenance reports filed that evening, Chief Aviation Machinist Harry Davidson noted an observation that would reshape Pacific air combat. Zero pilots consistently broke pursuit when Wildcats reversed into steep descending turns. The pattern suggested vulnerability. The numbers were about to shift. Captain Joe Mannion stood at the port catwalk of USS Enterprise, 280 miles northeast of Guadalcanal, as pre-dawn light turned the Pacific from black to slate. Salt spray misted across the flight deck, where deck crews chocked F4F Wildcats in staggered rows. The air smelled of aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the faint metallic tang of overnight welding from the hangar bay below. Mannion checked his kneeboard. Fighter Squadron 6 would launch 12 aircraft at 0630 for combat air patrol over the invasion fleet. His gloves, sweat-stained leather from 3 months of carrier operations, felt stiff in the tropical humidity. Behind him, Aviation Ordnance Man 2nd Class Martinez loaded 50 caliber ammunition belts into wing bays, 1,140 rounds per aircraft, mixed ball and tracer at 4-to-1 ratio. The Wildcats sat low on their landing gear, stubby and solid, each carrying 144 gallons of fuel for approximately 2 hours of patrol time. Mannion's aircraft, Bureau number 5193, showed patch repairs along the fuselage where 7.7mm rounds had penetrated during the previous day's engagement. He traced one finger along the aluminum skin, still cool before the sun rose higher. Radio static crackled from the island superstructure, communications checks with Fighter Direction Officer in Combat Information Center. The tempo felt different this morning. Intelligence had reported increased Zero activity from Rabaul, and the morning briefing noted that Japanese reinforcements were pushing south. Mannion's squadron had lost 2 pilots in 4 days. Replacement aircraft arrived, but replacement pilots took weeks. He exhaled slowly, watching deck crews remove tie-down chains, and climbed toward his cockpit. The war was 12 hours old at Guadalcanal. The air war was just beginning. At 0917, Lieutenant Bill Buzz Schaefer led the 2nd Division into a climbing turn at 8,000 feet, his Wildcats, Pratt & Whitney, R1830 engine pulling hard against thin air. 4 Zeros had been spotted inbound from the northwest, descending through broken cumulus. Schaefer's division, 4 aircraft in loose finger 4 formation, pushed throttles forward, airspeed climbing past 210 knots. The Zeros appeared suddenly, silver flashes against white cloud, their elliptical wings unmistakable. Schaefer keyed his radio. Tally 4 bandits, 11 o'clock high. The Japanese fighters split, 2 breaking left, 2 continuing their dive. Schaefer followed the nearer pair, his gunsight pipper tracking the lead Zero as it rolled inverted and pulled through. He squeezed the trigger. 6 50 caliber machine guns hammered, the Wildcat shuddering as spent casings tumbled past the cockpit. Tracers reached out but fell behind. The Zero had already reversed, climbing away with impossible agility. Schaefer's wingman called out another Zero, slashing in from 4 o'clock. He broke hard right, G-forces pressing him into his seat, vision tunneling slightly. The Wildcat groaned through the turn, slower and heavier than its opponent. When Schaefer rolled wings level, one of his division was trailing smoke, descending in a wide spiral toward the water below. The pilot did not respond to radio calls. Schaefer's hands tightened on the stick. This was the third loss in 2 days. Predictable, documented, and unbearable. He scanned the sky. The Zeros had disengaged, climbing back toward their patrol altitude, a crackle of static. All fighters, return to station. We've got more inbound. Schaefer turned south, fuel gauge showing 70 gallons remaining. Hope arrived in fragments, if at all. At 09:43, Joe Mannion's engine coughed again, this time losing power for a full 2 seconds before surging back. His right hand instinctively checked the mixture control. Full rich. The carburetor was flooding under -G, a chronic issue with the Wildcat's fuel system that had been documented in after-action reports since Coral Sea. He was at 11,500 feet, pursuing a Zero that had made the mistake of diving instead of climbing. The Japanese pilot pulled hard, trying to zoom back up, but Mannion anticipated the move and rolled inverted, pulling through into a high-side gun pass. The Zero filled his reflector sight. He fired a 2-second burst. Tracers converged. The Zero's engine cowling erupted in white smoke and fragments. The aircraft snapped left, then tumbled, one wing shearing away. Mannion watched it spiral down, counting seconds until it hit the water 3 miles below. His heart hammered, not from exertion but from disbelief. That was his third confirmed kill in 2 weeks, a rare achievement when most engagements ended in fuel exhaustion and defensive maneuvers. He leveled off and scanned for threats, but the sky had momentarily cleared. Then his engine quit entirely. The propeller windmilled, useless. Oil pressure dropped to 0. Mannion's stomach tightened. He nosed down to maintain airspeed, scanning for the carrier below. Enterprise was visible 15 miles south, a grey sliver on blue water. He calculated glide ratio, altitude, distance. It would be close. He keyed the radio. Wildcat 5-1 declaring emergency. Engine failure. Gliding for the deck. The reply came immediately. Roger 5-1. Deck is clear. Winds down the angle. His altimeter unwound. At 4,000 feet he dropped his landing gear. At 800 feet he could see deck crew scrambling. At 50 feet he crossed the ramp. The Wildcat hit hard, tailhook catching the number 3 wire, and jerked to a stop. Mannion sat motionless, adrenaline draining away. Outside, mechanics were already swarming the aircraft. One of them shouted up at him, "Engine's done, sir. We'll get you another bird." Mannion climbed out slowly. They didn't have another bird. They barely had enough to cover the next patrol. Chief Aviation Machinist Harry Doc Davidson knelt beside Bureau number 51993's cowling in the hangar bay, fluorescent work lights casting harsh shadows across disassembled engine components. It was 14:30 and the heat below deck hovered near 95 degrees. Sweat dripped from his nose onto the oil-stained schematic spread before him. The R-1830 engine had seized due to oil starvation, predictable given the sustained high-G maneuvering Mannion described. But Davidson had noticed something else. Over the past week, 8 Wildcats had returned with fuel delivery issues during -G flight. The float-type carburetor, designed for stable flight, couldn't maintain fuel flow when the aircraft pushed over into a dive or rolled inverted while pursuing Zeros. Davidson had read the Pratt & Whitney technical manual cover to cover. There was no field fix listed, but there was a workaround. He called over aviation machinists, mate First Class Kowalski, who had worked in a Delaware aircraft plant before enlisting. Together they examined the carburetor assembly. "If we reduce the float chamber pressure," Davidson said, tracing a fuel line with one grease-stained finger. And adjust the needle valve tolerances. We can prevent flooding during negative G. Won't be perfect, but it'll keep the engine running. Kowalski nodded slowly. How long? 4 hours per aircraft. Maybe less if we get a rhythm. Davidson stood, joints aching. They had 11 operational Wildcats. If they modified 4 tonight, those 4 could fly tomorrow's morning patrol with improved performance. He wiped his hands on a rag and climbed the ladder to the flight deck, where Mannion was reviewing the next day's sortie assignments. "Captain," Davidson said, "if you can give me until 22, I've got something that'll help." Mannion looked up, exhausted. "Help how?" "Your engine quit because the carburetor flooded. I can fix that. Not permanently, but enough." Mannion studied him for a long moment. Below them, the sound of rivet guns echoed from the hangar bay. "Do it," Mannion said. "We'll fly what you finish." Davidson descended back into the heat and noise. War was fought with bullets and fuel, but it was won in moments like this. Mechanics against physics, racing the clock. By 21:45, 4 Wildcats sat in the hangar bay with modified carburetors, engine cowlings still open, mechanics running final checks. Davidson watched as Kowalski test ran Bureau number 5071, the engine note smooth and strong at full throttle. The modification worked. It wasn't elegant. Pratt & Whitney's engineers would probably have objected on technical grounds, but it solved the immediate problem. Fuel flow remained consistent even when the test rig simulated negative G conditions. Davidson logged the changes in his maintenance notebook. Carburetor float chamber pressure reduced, needle valve tolerance adjusted, 0.03 inches, fuel flow verified under simulated negative G. He noted the tail numbers of the modified aircraft. At 0550 the next morning, those 4 Wildcats would launch with Mannion's division. If the modification held under combat conditions, they'd begin converting the rest of the squadron. Davidson walked the flight deck as false dawn lit the eastern horizon. The modified Wildcats were spotted forward, fueled and armed. Deck crew had stenciled fresh kill markings on 2 of the fuselages, small rising suns, white paint on dark blue. He thought about the pilots who would fly these aircraft in 3 hours, and the pilots who wouldn't come back. The mathematics of attrition were straightforward. The Zeros were superior aircraft in most performance categories. American pilots compensated with tactics, aggression, and the Wildcats' structural strength, but those advantages had limits. The modified carburetors wouldn't change the fundamental equation, but they might shift it enough to matter. Davidson returned below deck, where his crew was already starting work on the 5th aircraft. The night stretched ahead, measured in wrench turns and engine tests. Each small adjustment, a quiet refusal to accept the odds as fixed. In the report filed 3 weeks later, Davidson's modification would be described as field expedient carburetor adjustment improving negative G fuel flow characteristics. In the hangar bay that night, it was survival engineering, born from observation and necessity. The work continued until dawn. At 09:05 on August 8th, Joe Mannion pushed his Wildcat into a split S at 9,000 feet, inverting and pulling through into a vertical dive after a Zero that had made a slashing pass on his wingman. His engine didn't hesitate. The carburetor held steady, fuel flowing smoothly as negative G lifted him against his restraint harness. He centered the Zero in his gun sight and fired a 3-second burst at 400 yards, closing fast. The Japanese fighter rolled hard left, but Mannion followed, his Wildcat responsive and solid. Tracers walked across the Zero's fuselage. The canopy shattered. The aircraft snap-rolled and fell away, trailing smoke. Mannion pulled out at 3,000 feet, engine still running strong, and climbed back toward his division. His radio crackled. "Good kill, Lade. That's 2 today." Mannion didn't reply immediately. He was processing what had just happened. For the first time since arriving in the South Pacific, his Wildcat had performed exactly as needed during aggressive maneuvering. The engine hadn't quit. The carburetor hadn't flooded. He'd been able to pursue through a negative G roll without losing power. That single technical change, invisible to anyone watching from the outside, had fundamentally altered the engagement dynamic. He keyed his mic. "All aircraft, if you need to push over hard, do it. The engines will hold." 3 acknowledgements came back. His division climbed to 12,000 feet and resumed patrol. 30 minutes later, they intercepted another Zero formation, 6 aircraft in loose V formation, heading toward the invasion fleet. Mannion led his division into a high-side attack, diving from above and ahead, using the Wildcat's superior diving speed. The Zeros scattered. Mannion selected one target, rolled inverted, pulled through, and fired. The Zero exploded in a bright flash of fuel and ammunition. He pulled up, checked his 6, and rolled into another attack. By the time he landed back on Enterprise at 11:20, his division had claimed 5 confirmed kills with no losses. Davidson met him on the flight deck. "How'd she run?" Mannion pulled off his leather helmet, hair matted with sweat. "Like we just got a new airplane." Davidson nodded slowly. "I'll have the rest done by tomorrow." The numbers were beginning to shift. Lieutenant Buzz Schaefer led the dawn patrol on August 9th, flying Bureau number 4867, one of the newly modified Wildcats. At 07:30, his division intercepted 8 Zeros northeast of Savo Island. The Japanese fighters held altitude advantage, diving from 15,000 feet in coordinated pairs. Schaefer broke left. His wingman tucked in close and reversed hard into the attack. His engine maintained power through the maneuver. He climbed aggressively, trading airspeed for altitude, and caught 1 Zero as it completed its dive and began climbing back up. The Japanese pilot didn't expect pursuit. Schaefer fired a long burst. The Zero's wing root erupted in flame. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell. Schaefer's wingman called out another Zero maneuvering onto his tail. Schaefer reversed, dumped his nose, and accelerated in a steep dive. The Zero followed. At 8,000 feet, Schaefer pulled hard, sustaining 4 Gs through the turn. His vision grayed slightly, but the engine roared without interruption. He rolled out with the Zero in his sights and fired. Hits sparkled along the fuselage. The Zero snap-rolled and dived away, trailing smoke. Schaefer didn't pursue. Fuel was getting low. He called his division to reform and turned south toward Enterprise. They landed at 09:10, all 4 aircraft intact. Deck crew counted bullet holes, 23 total across the division, none critical. Schaefer climbed out of his cockpit and stood on the wing, watching as ordnance crews reloaded ammunition and plane handlers refueled his Wildcat. The fatigue of the previous weeks, constant losses, defensive flying, watching friends die, had begun to lift. The Wildcats were still slower than Zeros, still less maneuverable, but they were no longer fundamentally disadvantaged. The carburetor modification had restored one critical capability: the ability to maneuver aggressively without engine failure. That single change altered tactics. American pilots could now pursue through negative G maneuvers, dive aggressively, and recover without losing power. The Zeros retained many advantages, but the gap had narrowed. Schaefer walked toward the ready room, where intelligence officers were updating the tactical board with the morning's results. 5 Zeros confirmed destroyed. 0 American losses. The ratio had inverted. He sat down heavily in a canvas chair, accepted a cup of coffee from a yeoman, and closed his eyes. Outside, mechanics were already servicing his Wildcat for the afternoon patrol. The work never stopped. Neither did the math. And for the first time, the math was moving in the right direction. By August 12th, all 16 Wildcats in Fighter Squadron 6 had received the carburetor modification. Maintenance logs documented the change with bureaucratic precision. Carburetor float chamber adjustment per Chief Davidson Technical Bulletin, all aircraft operational. The impact appeared in the daily sortie reports. On August 10th, the squadron flew 27 combat air patrol sorties with 14 confirmed kills and 1 loss. A pilot who bailed out after taking cannon fire and was recovered by a destroyer. On August 11th, 31 sorties yielded 19 confirmed kills and 0 losses. The loss ratio had reversed from 2.31 against American forces to approximately 3:1 in favor. Intelligence officers in Enterprise's Combat Information Center began tracking the shift. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, the Air Group commander, requested a briefing from Davidson on the technical modification. They met in the hangar bay at 14 UT, with Davidson explaining the carburetor adjustment using a disassembled unit as reference. McCluskey listened, asked 3 questions about reliability, and nodded. How fast can we get this to the other carriers? Davidson had anticipated the question. I can write up the procedure tonight. Any machinist's mate with engine experience can do the work. 4 hours per aircraft, give or take. McCluskey made a note. Do it. I'll send it up the chain. That evening, Davidson typed a 3-page technical bulletin on a portable typewriter in the ship's office, describing the modification in detail with diagrams sketched by hand. The document went by courier to USS Saratoga and USS Wasp the following morning. Within 2 weeks, Wildcat squadrons across the Pacific Fleet were implementing the same adjustment. The modification was never officially adopted by Pratt & Whitney. It violated several engineering specifications, but it worked. Fleet maintenance officers quietly incorporated it into standard procedures. No formal commendation was issued. Davidson's name appeared in no official reports. The carburetor adjustment became one of thousands of small field modifications that shaped the Pacific Air War, documented only in maintenance logs and technical bulletins that few would ever read. Davidson returned to his maintenance rotation, supervising engine overhauls and tracking flight hours. The war continued. Aircraft broke, pilots died, and the mechanics worked through the night, every night, keeping the Wildcats airborne. The numbers told the story. Everything else was noise. On August 24th, during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, Fighter Squadron 6 flew 42 sorties in defense of the carrier task force. Japanese bombers attacked in 3 waves, escorted by Zeros from the carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku. Manion led his division into the first wave at 1420, intercepting 18 Valdive bombers at 12,000 feet. The Wildcats dove from above, breaking up the bomber formation before it could begin its attack run. Manion shot down 2 Vals in the first pass, his modified Wildcat responsive and reliable through aggressive maneuvers. His division claimed 7 confirmed kills in 4 minutes. The Zeros arrived seconds later, diving from high cover. Manion reversed into them, his engine holding power as he pulled through a hard barrel roll and fired at a Zero crossing his nose. The Japanese fighter broke apart. He checked his fuel, 30 gallons remaining. Enough for 1 more engagement, then back to the carrier. The second wave arrived at 1450, 27 aircraft, mixed bombers, and fighters. Schaefer's division intercepted north of the task force, engaging Zeros while the bombers pressed their attack. Schaefer's Wildcat took 7.7mm hits in the left wing and fuselage, but the engine continued running. He pursued a Zero through a climbing spiral, fired at 200 yards, and watched it fall burning into the sea. The bombers broke through. 3 reached attack position over Enterprise. Bombs fell. 1 hit the flight deck aft of the island, penetrating to the gallery deck below and detonating in a berthing space. The carrier shuddered, slowing. Damage control teams responded immediately. The third wave never materialized. American fighters had decimated the first 2, and Japanese commanders recalled the attack. By 1630 the sky was clear. Fighter Squadron 6 had claimed 23 confirmed kills. 2 pilots were lost, 1 to a Zero's cannon fire, 1 to anti-aircraft fire from friendly ships during the chaotic defense. Enterprise's flight deck was damaged but operational. Aircraft landed carefully, avoiding the cratered section where repair crews were already cutting away twisted steel and welding patches. Mannion landed last, his Wildcat nearly out of fuel. He shut down the engine and sat motionless in the cockpit, hands trembling slightly from adrenaline and fatigue. Outside, the carrier burned in 3 places, smoke rising into the humid evening air. They had won the engagement. The cost was visible everywhere. Enterprise withdrew from the combat zone for repairs, reaching Tongatapu on August 28th. Damage assessment teams catalogued the destruction. 1 bomb hit, 23 dead, extensive flight deck and hangar bay damage, estimated repair time 4 weeks. Fighter Squadron 6 transferred temporarily to Espiritu Santo, operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, while the carrier underwent repairs. The airfield was primitive, a single runway carved from jungle, mud during rain, dust during sun, no revetments, minimal support infrastructure. Fuel arrived by transport ship. Ammunition came in wooden crates stamped with manufacturing dates from 1941. Spare parts were scavenged from damaged aircraft. Davidson and his maintenance crew worked in open-air shelters, protecting engines and instruments from tropical moisture. Despite conditions, the squadron maintained operations. Daily combat air patrols launched at dawn and dusk, intercepting Japanese bombers, attacking the marine positions along the Lunga perimeter. The modified Wildcats continued performing reliably. On September 2nd, squadron records showed 31 sorties with 9 confirmed kills and 1 aircraft lost to ground fire during a strafing run. The pilot walked back to base 6 hours later, carrying his parachute. On September 5th, Mannion received a message from McCluskey via naval radio. The carburetor modification had been disseminated fleet-wide, with positive results reported from Saratoga, Wasp, and land-based marine squadrons. Wildcat loss ratios across the Pacific had improved from 2.31 to approximately 1.51, still unfavorable but survivable. McCluskey's message ended with a single line: "Good work. Keep them flying." Mannion posted the message in the operations tent. His pilots read it without comment, then returned to their pre-flight checks. The recognition meant less than the results. They were surviving missions that would have been fatal 3 weeks earlier. The Wildcats were still outmatched by Zeros in speed and maneuverability, but they could now fight on more equal terms. Aggressive tactics, diving attacks, negative G reversals, sustained pursuits, were possible without engine failure. The modification hadn't made the Wildcat a superior fighter, it had made it a competitive one. That night, Davidson sat outside the maintenance shelter, listening to the sound of distant artillery from the marine perimeter. Rain began falling, light at first, then heavy. He pulled a tarp over the disassembled engine he'd been working on and retreated into the shelter. Tomorrow there would be more sorties, more repairs, more improvisations. The war continued, measured in flight hours and engine overhauls, each day exactly like the last. except the numbers kept improving. And in war, numbers were everything. By late September, Fighter Squadron 6 had logged 287 combat sorties from Henderson Field, with 41 confirmed kills and 7 aircraft lost, 3 to combat, 4 to operational accidents and ground fire. The modified carburetors had proven reliable under extreme conditions. High humidity, coral dust, sustained high G maneuvering, and minimal maintenance intervals. Davidson's technical bulletin had been refined twice based on feedback from other squadrons, with minor adjustments to needle valve tolerances and float chamber pressure specifications. The modification became standard procedure, taught to new aviation machinists' mates during carrier qualifications. On September 28th, Enterprise returned to the South Pacific, repairs complete, and Fighter Squadron 6 re-embarked. Mannion stood on the flight deck as the Wildcats were hoisted aboard by crane, watching deck crews secure them in familiar spots. The carrier felt different, newer somehow, despite the visible scars of repair work. Or perhaps he was different. 3 months of combat had changed everyone. He had started the Guadalcanal campaign with 16 pilots. 9 remained. The others were dead, missing, or evacuated with injuries. Replacement pilots arrived weekly, young men with flight training but no combat experience. Mannion briefed them on tactics. Maintain altitude advantage, use diving attacks. Don't dogfight zeros in turning engagements. Trust your Wildcat's structural strength and firepower. And one more thing, your engine will run through negative G maneuvers. Use that. Pursue aggressively when you have the advantage. The new pilots nodded, not quite understanding. They would learn. On October 1st, Enterprise rejoined the task force, operating northeast of Guadalcanal. Fighter Squadron 6 resumed combat air patrols. The war continued its relentless arithmetic. On October 26th, during the Battle of Santa Cruz, Mannion's squadron intercepted a massive Japanese strike, 64 aircraft targeting Enterprise and Hornet. The engagement lasted 40 minutes. Mannion shot down 3 Vals, his Wildcat absorbing 7.7 limited hits in the tail and left wing. Schaefer claimed 2 Zeros. The squadron lost 2 pilots. Enterprise took 3 bomb hits and withdrew from combat again. Hornet was sunk. American victory was measured in survival, not triumph. But the loss ratios had stabilized. Wildcats were holding their own against Zeros, not through superior performance but through tactical adaptation and technical reliability. The carburetor modification was one small part of that equation. Invisible to historians, absent from official combat reports, but present in every engagement. As Enterprise steamed toward Noumea for repairs, Davidson compiled his maintenance records. The modified Wildcats had logged 147 flight hours without a single carburetor-related engine failure. He noted this in his log with quiet satisfaction. The work had mattered. The numbers proved it. Enterprise reached Noumea on November 2, 1942, for extensive repairs that would keep the carrier out of action until May 1943. Fighter Squadron 6 transferred to USS Essex, a new carrier arriving in the Pacific with improved aircraft, F4F Hellcats, designed from the beginning to outperform the Zero. Mannion and his pilots transitioned to the new fighters, and the Wildcats were reassigned to escort carrier squadrons and marine units. By early 1943, the F4F Wildcat was being phased out of fleet carrier service, replaced by aircraft with better performance and purpose-built advantages. But the lessons learned during those desperate months over Guadalcanal endured. The carburetor modification developed by Davidson and his crew became standard on all remaining Wildcats, improving reliability and survivability through the end of their service life. Marine squadrons operating from island bases flew modified Wildcats into 1944, racking up impressive kill ratios against Japanese aircraft over the Central Pacific. The modification was never glamorous. It appeared in technical manuals as a footnote, in maintenance logs as a routine adjustment, in official histories not at all. Yet between August and November 1942, it helped shift the air war in the South Pacific from disaster to stalemate to slow advantage. On December 15, 1942, Joe Manion received the Distinguished Flying Cross for leadership during the Guadalcanal and Santa Cruz campaigns. The citation mentioned 10 confirmed kills and exemplary performance under combat conditions. It said nothing about engine modifications or maintenance innovations. Manion accepted the medal during a brief ceremony on Essex's hangar deck, then returned to flight operations. The war was far from over. Harry Davidson remained a chief aviation machinist, serving on Enterprise through the end of the war. He never received formal recognition for the carburetor modification. His name appeared in no commendations. His technical bulletin circulated quietly through fleet maintenance channels, read by mechanics who understood its value without needing official acknowledgement. He continued supervising engine overhauls, training new mechanics, and solving problems that didn't exist in manuals. In May 1945, when Enterprise returned to Pearl Harbor for the final time, Davidson walked the hangar bay one last time, running his hand along the workbenches where he'd spent 3 years keeping aircraft operational. The war in Europe had ended. The war in the Pacific was approaching its conclusion. The Wildcats were gone, replaced by Hellcats and Corsairs. But the work remained the same. Mechanics against physics, ingenuity against limitation, small adjustments that meant survival. Davidson's technical bulletin would be filed away in naval archives, one document among millions, its impact impossible to quantify. The men who flew the modified Wildcats knew what it meant. That was enough. The Pacific War ended on August 15, 1945. Final aircraft loss statistics compiled by the Naval Analysis Division showed that F4F Wildcats achieved an overall kill ratio of 5.9.1 against Japanese aircraft, an improbable figure for an aircraft consistently outperformed in speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. The ratio was achieved through tactical discipline, aggressive use of the Wildcat's strengths, and numerous small technical improvements that accumulated into decisive advantage. The carburetor modification developed by Chief Davidson in August 1942 was one such improvement. It was never officially credited with changing the course of the air war, but maintenance records showed clear correlation. Wildcat squadrons with modified carburetors sustained fewer losses and achieved higher kill ratios than those without. The modification eliminated a critical vulnerability, allowing pilots to maneuver aggressively without engine failure. That single change, invisible in performance specifications, absent from combat narratives, shaped engagement outcomes across hundreds of sorties. Joe Manion survived the war with 19 confirmed kills, serving in combat operations from Guadalcanal through Okinawa. He left the Navy in 1946 and returned to his family's farm in Iowa, where he rarely spoke about the war. When asked about his experiences, he mentioned the pilots he flew with, the ones who came home and the ones who didn't. He never mentioned the carburetor modification. He probably never knew it existed. Harry Davidson remained in the Navy until 1950, retiring as a senior chief. He returned to Delaware and worked as a civilian aircraft mechanic until 1968. His wartime technical bulletins were declassified in the 1970s and donated to the National Archives, where they remain available to researchers studying maintenance innovations during World War II. Few have read them. The F4F Wildcat was retired from US service in 1945, replaced by more capable aircraft. Surviving examples exist in museums, restored to pristine condition, their carburetors configured to factory specifications. The field modifications that kept them flying during the desperate months of 1942 have been erased by preservation efforts focused on authenticity. The story of the Wildcat's success is told through pilot bravery, tactical innovation, and industrial production. These narratives are true and important, but they are incomplete. Behind every combat sortie were mechanics working through the night, solving problems with limited tools and improvised solutions. Their work appears in maintenance logs, technical bulletins, and repair records, documents that survive in archives, unread but enduring. The numbers tell a different story. Between August and November 1942, Wildcat loss ratios improved from 2.31 against to 1.5.1 against, eventually reaching parity and then advantage. Small changes accumulated into decisive shifts. Survival became victory, one sortie at a time. The file closed without fanfare. The numbers had already rewritten the war.